This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Welcome to Medicine and Health with Dr. Paul Anderson. This is a show about opening up the often mysterious world of how doctors think. The goal? To empower the listener to gain access to the best health care possible.
Good day and welcome to Medicine and Health with Dr. Paul Anderson. That's me. I'm Dr. Paul. And today I've been waiting for this show. We have a guest on. If you're watching on the video, you already see that. But we have a guest that I've worked with in the past and done some collaborations, and she's interviewed me a couple times, I think, at least. And she has a new book out, and it's about small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And it's called Healing Sibo. And I don't know that there's a right way to say Sibo or Sibo. I think that's whatever you want. But I wanted to talk about this because it's, aside from the fact it's a great book and it's brand new and most people don't know it's out unless you happen to have it. But the whole topic of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and how it affects a lot of people's health in ways that they don't even know it's affecting them, and how it connects to a lot of other health problems that people have, is something that many more people know about now than 5 years ago, but it's still a very unknown quantity. So I have today with us the author of Healing Sibo, and this is Shivan Sarna. How are you doing today?
I'm thrilled to see you. It's great to be here. Thanks, Paul, Dr. Anderson.
It's always great to talk to you. We always have fun, and I think it was the first time you interviewed me for some. I don't remember what it was. It was at a conference, and we talked about, I think, biofilms, and that went on, I think, longer than we had originally planned. So we don't ever lack for discussion anyway. But Shivan has created and co-created a number of online summits, Digestion SOS documentary series, Gut and Microbiome Rescue Summit, Lymphatic Rescue Summit, and then Chronic Condition Research Foundation. And I will, rather than reading about you, I will just talk to you and ask you some questions, and we'll get into the book and all of that. But do you so obviously you have a book, and usually when people get to the point of writing a book about a topic, they have a lot of background with it one way or the other. So for probably at least a large number of people listening who may have only heard of Sibo or know a little bit about it, can you give us the elevator pitch version of where the core of it? There's a lot of other places, but.
Yeah, absolutely. SIBO stands for small intestine bacterial overgrowth. And it can be caused from a variety of things, which we'll get into. But I just want to address the symptoms, which I had so many of. And someone out there listening to this may also have, and be like, oh, finally, now I know it has a name, possibly. So bloating, diarrhea, constipation, alternating diarrhea and constipation, weird B12 levels, weird iron levels, malnutrition, unexplained weight loss, unexplained weight gain, brain fog, and on and on and on. This feeling of malaise, rosacea, restless leg syndrome. I've even spoken to some specialists who feel like it might be related to infertility as well. Interesting. So that is the result of when bacteria that should normally be in the large intestine ends up in the small intestine and overgrows, thus the name Sibo. It can come from a variety of things, including adhesions, like if you get kicked by a horse in the belly, or you softball hits you, and then the body does this wonderful thing to try to put you back together and basically makes interior scar tissue after abdominal surgery, cesarean sections. that can actually then move some of the other tissue in your body, including your small intestine, and inhibit a cleansing wave called the migrating motor complex, which is what, when that's malfunctioning, the bacteria will overgrow. But it also can be from serious scleroderma, alcoholism, opioid use, even a little like pain meds after dental surgery, deep anesthesia, Ehlers-Danlos, food poisoning, post-infectious IBS, huge new, there's a fairly new test, IBS smart test. You can actually test if you have that. Food poisoning from when I was 5 impacted me still to this day. I am positive for the antibodies that have been confusing my migrating motor complex. So it hasn't done the sweeping motion well. And I didn't even know what Sibo was, Dr. Anderson. Like, I just assumed I had IBS. I went to a doctor, it's all in the book, and he told me to run 3 miles and gave me a script for every day and gave me a script for an antidepressant. And I thought, okay, so bottom line is I fell down this rabbit hole and I was like, holy crap, literally, I need to tell the world about this, because if I have a college education and I have a little bit of a disposable income and I have great insurance, and I have a little bit of time on my hands, and I'm having such a hard time. And most of the doctors I went to, and I went to a lot of doctors, had never even like heard of something beyond IBS. My Ayurveda didn't work. The acupuncture didn't work. The Rolfing didn't work. Blah, 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 blah. Finally, I found out what Sibo was. I found Dr. Allison Seebecker. She's a world-renowned Sibo specialist. She helped me along with several other doctors, thank God. And I was able to now manage my Sibo because I do have those antibodies. I still could have Sibo if I didn't take a prokinetic to help stimulate the migrating motor complex. We'll get into it. There are 3 major treatments for treating Sibo, and then you want to be sure to follow up with a prokinetic so you can make sure that you don't have a relapse. There you go, in a nutshell.
That's a great summary. Yeah, I think of course, if someone's listening and they have it or have been diagnosed, they know the difficulty usually of getting to a diagnosis, because it's it's not like it's a brand new thing doctors are thinking of, but in most doctors' minds, they either don't know about it or it's sort of I've heard of that, but there must be some other doctor that deals with that. One thing I would say that's the door is cracking open a little bit in the world of gastroenterology, the specialty where the GI tract is involved. It's slowly opening there to at least be known and at least be maybe tested for, et cetera. Another thing I find interesting, which we can talk about the connections later, but a pop in your description earlier of this just wide variety of symptoms and signs that people can have when they don't know that SIBO is the problem. A not insignificant number of our patients who were diagnosed with things like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue and some of those things. Also, this was one of the huge contributing factors, because as you were saying, it throws off a lot of things that the person might look healthy and they feel horrible, and then their labs are just oddly skewed, and they can suffer from, even though they may be eating quote unquote normally, a level of malnutrition, and so then their cells aren't getting the nutrients, et cetera. So I think that's another really important thing to bring up, that a lot of people have these sort of broad diagnoses like fibro or chronic fatigue, et cetera, and there can be many causes underneath. And this is one where when we were starting to become aware of it and testing for it, et cetera, there were a number of our fibromyalgia patients, especially, that this was a big, huge contributor. And I'm sure that might be in your background. I mean, and it's obviously it's in the book too, but you had a very florid trip, I'll say, from your childhood and not feeling well to finally figuring out kind of what the hub of the wheel was.
Yeah. It was a journey, and I have a few like funny stories, dramatic stories, a lot of tips about how to get through the day. when you have SIBO and the diet, which doesn't cure it, but does treat the symptoms, and you can feel better very, very quickly with that. Paul, I did have fibro, and I did have, cortisone shots, and, again, thousands of dollars in body work. It was like the only thing holding me together. Just massive inflammation, and LDN, low dose naltrexone, really helped my fibro. I love to tell people about that too, just because it's such a magic drug. Go to ldnresearchtrust.org if you have inflammation and check that out, LDN. But I think I do still hear people tell me in the Facebook group, SIBO SOS community, that their doctors don't believe in SIBO, which makes me sad and laugh at the same time. If you have all these symptoms, the other thing that I want to always mention is if you do get a SIBO breath test from maybe Aerodiagnostics Labs or Gemelli Labs, which now has a test for all three gases that are produced by those bacteria in the small intestine overgrowing, hydrogen, methane, or hydrogen sulfide. If you get a negative test and you prep for it properly and it's right, like you really know it's right and the lab knows it's right, then test for parasites and candida, which is hard to test for. I know the questionnaire is great. So because the symptoms of SIBO mimic those two things. And by the way, a lot of times, like you were saying, people with SIBO also have parasites and also have candida. So it's a real joy. Yeah, that's what it is.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, with any chronic problem, obviously the earlier you figure out that it's a problem for you, the better, because you don't have years of, improper treatment and things to, stack up. But often the people that, we wind up encountering and seeing, and probably the people you interact with the most, it's not been diagnosed early. It's been, diagnosed later, and then you build all these other layers of problems on top of it, so you can have like 3 or 4 things at the same time, all who have similar symptoms. And I think that as we've talked about on some of the summits and then some of the SIBO conferences, we go into this, teasing that out and unwinding it becomes that's why you want to work with a doctor who's done this before and kind of has that has a macro view down, because what I would call quote unquote a simpler case is usually someone diagnosed earlier. They haven't, they may not have mechanical problems like adhesions and things. They haven't had time to build up a bunch of other infectious problems and biofilms and stuff. But a lot of the people, the SIBO can be really well addressed. And if those other things aren't looked for, it's just this loop, it's this sort of evil cycle. So in obviously your own story led to the book, and again we both have one, but there it is, Healing SIBO. And I'm assuming that people can get this anywhere online.
Amazon, anywhere books are sold.
Anywhere books are sold. So whatever your favorite. Probably Barnes & Noble online, Powell's Books online.
Places. I'm so sorry. I love local bookstores, but I don't know if they all have it. Yeah. So, but definitely Amazon and places.
And a lot of one thing I found with our books too is that most of sales are online now. But if you want to support a local bookstore, a lot of them now have online portals where they at least get something for the sale. So check that out. But one of the first, at least the way that SIBO kind of came to me, and I'm in a different, I have a different point of view because I'm a clinician, and so I watched it sort of emerge as a diagnosis, as opposed to it's one of the health conditions I don't have, so that's great. But so I got to watch it from the outside, but I had a lot of really sick patients. So I was very intrigued by the early work that was done, and the one of the I think this is a subtitle, Fix the Real Cause of IBS, Bloating, and Weight Issues. So IBS, Irritable Bowel or Inflammatory Bowel Syndrome, is one of those things. If you've been diagnosed with IBS, you already know that. And normally it's a lot like, say, being told you have fibromyalgia. It's a cluster of symptoms, and your doctor says, well, thankfully you don't have Crohn's or colitis, you don't have cancer, we don't want any of those.
Right.
But we don't know what it is. It's something a lot of people have, and we call it, irritable bowel or inflammatory bowel syndrome. And so then it's like, well, what do I do about it? And then depending on the doctor, the advice may be shorter or longer. And the people I started to hear about this crazy idea of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth about were researchers who were working also with patients, and they were talking about, there's an underlying cause to a lot of IBS cases, which is great because we've never been able to figure it out. And these were people who weren't any people who don't realize anything new in medicine is not embraced really quickly. So these were researchers where they really had to kind of keep at it, and they had to keep telling people and showing their data and all of this, and it really kind of grew out of that. And so, we owe a debt to those folks. But as soon as I heard some of the early people talking about it and writing about it, I started to see a lot of my chronically ill patients and see that this has to be a piece of the puzzle. But the other thing was, I always felt like IBS had some infectious component or another that we just didn't know about yet. And it turns out that's one of the problems. Now, one of the things that you said earlier that I just want to go back to, because I think it's really important for people to get the picture in their mind. And that's this idea of the cleansing wave and the migrating motor complex and all of that. So what people may or may not know is, so after your stomach is the small intestine, and it's in 3 parts. It's a very long tube, and it has this motion called peristalsis that moves through. But it is it's distinct anatomically, but it's also distinct from a point of view of its normal bacterial flora and other flora from the large intestine, which comes after it. And so it's supposed to have certain things in it that are alive and helping you digest, et cetera, and it's not supposed to have certain things in it. When you mix the two and you put the wrong bugs in the wrong place, usually you don't feel well. That's the quickest way to say it. Yeah. And so it literally is the biggest part of your intestines, the small intestine, has bacteria that overgrow that are not really infectious in Sibo. They're just in the wrong location. And that's why this motility part and the cleansing wave and all this business becomes so important. So, and I know in the book you talk about that and you get into describing it, letting people know, all about it. But when you look at the core treatments that are involved, you had mentioned that some people like yourself still need to be on a prokinetic. Explain what that is to folks.
The 3 main treatments for Sibo are, and these are not in order of importance, is herbal protocol, which has been studied to be maybe even slightly more effective than pharmaceuticals, but you have to take them for longer. So like, let's say a month instead of 2 weeks of the pharmaceuticals. With the herbals, it can be like oil of oregano, Candibactin AR, Candibactin BR, allicin in like Alimed, Alimax, some good killing machines, basically. Mm-hmm. So that's one approach. The other approach is with a drug that is actually given to people who have traveler's diarrhea, and that is Zyfaxin. That's the brand name. Rifaximin is the name of this drug, and it's a fascinating drug because it is an antibiotic. It stays in the small intestine. You can actually take multiple rounds without becoming resistant to it, and it will, when paired with neomycin and a couple of other possible combinations, can help with methane producers, because there are 3 sort of producers, like these overgrowth organisms can either produce hydrogen gas, hydrogen sulfide gas, or methane gas. And then the treatment in those pharmaceuticals can be slightly tailored, as it can also be done with the herbals to impact each one. Then there's the elemental diet. And the elemental diet is a liquid diet that is nasty and tastes like vomit. And it's also the most effective. That is. But the good news is formulations have come out that taste a lot better than when I started this whole thing 5 years ago. And Integrative Therapeutics makes one called Physicians Elemental Diet. Dr. Michael Ruscio has one. They taste like very sweet sort of protein drinks. And you do that exclusively, like it is a liquid diet for 14 to 17 days. And then you retest at the end to see if you still have a bacterial overgrowth, and maybe you go a little bit longer. Always good to work with a really qualified Sibo nutritionist or a doctor. You're doing a liquid diet. You need to make sure you're drinking enough of it, to get enough calories. Some people even gain weight with the elemental diet because they're finally getting nutrition.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing that because I get asked this a lot, when you talk about an elemental diet, and I would underscore what you said. Most people, if you've ever been put on one, especially by a doctor who's not aware of the newer varieties, it's really rough. It's very rough. And what elemental literally means is it's all the nutrients in their simplest elemental form, with nothing that, or as little as possible, that would feed these the bacteria that shouldn't be there. So you're literally trying to starve them out while feeding you. Okay.
Right.
So it's a great theory. Didn't taste very good, and thankfully, and it's really fairly recent where some of the ones that are not, that horrible are. So when you look at and you had mentioned there's sort of a drug, a pharmaceutical approach, there's a herbal approach, and both actually have a fair amount of research. Both work, as you said, which is the normal experience. If you do the herbal approach, it's usually a little bit longer than the drugs. One of the things I think that's cool with the herbal approach, and sometimes people need it mixed, it depends how your doctor does this, but the herbs also, most of them that you mentioned that are used there, also have some other properties. They lower fungal elements, and they're kind of hard on some of the parasites. So sometimes the herbal approach, even if you've either partly failed a drug approach or whatever, is a good one to add on anyway for other reasons too.
Well, and because it is, so it has a reputation for relapse. And that's because if you don't do a prokinetic, you will relapse. And a lot of people don't understand that they need to do a prokinetic. So I've heard across a lot of different platforms, people say that, oh, no treatment works. People always relapse, but that's a why. I want people to understand the reason they relapse is because if they're not doing a prokinetic. And if they are doing one that's effective, maybe do a couple of them, depending, because there's ginger, there's Motegrity, there's Modal Pro, which is a brand of, one brand's name of a combination. So there are a lot of different ones you can do, and you just need to find the combination that works for you. And if you don't do that, and you've done all this other work, it's a drag because you could relapse. So please do the prokinetic.
You just go, you go back. And I think to go back to just a mechanical part of it, if you don't keep the motion going in the direction it's supposed to go, the bacteria that overgrow will just keep working their way back up in. And that's, I think, as you mentioned earlier, but I really want to underscore, if you've ever had an abdominal surgery of any kind, those adhesions develop. If you've ever had, as you said, just blunt trauma to the abdomen, taking a fastball to the abdomen or getting kicked, or if you did, martial arts people get this, or other sport, people, all sorts of things. And what I always, is just how our brain works. We don't like to remember, really bad things. So many of the patients that I found, it would be like the third time I would ask if there'd ever been any trauma before they would remember, oh, gee, yeah, when I was 15, and you think, how'd you forget that the first 2 times? Yeah. It's like, well, it was a bad memory, and it didn't, or people forget they had a surgery or whatever. So the prokinetics kind of universally are necessary for a while, but in people where you have mechanical reasons why things aren't moving, you'll just keep going in the cycle and having problems. So I do think that's really important. You do a great job in the book with that. Now, in the book, the way that it's laid out, and you know a lot of doctors, you talk to a lot of doctors, and you involve them in all of this. So
into it.
I know that you're very aware of how we all think. So one of the things I was looking at was from the point of view of a provider. Let's say I'm not informed very well about Sibo, but I think, gee, there's something to this, and my patient brings the book in. Is it the kind of thing that is a good provider interface? So they could look at it and kind of get the big picture, and because there are a lot of people who are interested who are providers.
Yeah. Well,
what page are we on there, by the way?
Say that. Go to page 111, and is it 111? It's 110. Yep. And this is the algorithm that Dr. Mark Pimentel created, and then Dr. Allison Seebecker and and Dr. Stephen Sandberg Lewis added to. And actually, I have another version where I did add to it, and I see that it's not in here, so that's really bumming me out. I have a massive major typo. There you go. But because underneath it should be a whole line that says "Find your underlying cause." But basically, It starts out. So you think you have SIBO, symptom relief through diet, and charcoal and other therapies there, and Dr. Seebecker's specific food guide. You can really feel better quite quickly with the symptoms. Do a lactulose 3-hour breath test. There's some other versions of it. Consider other diagnoses, choose a treatment, elemental diet, herbals, antibiotics, test after those treatments to see how much progress you've made and if it worked. And then you can either manage it or treat again. So this little guy is a really good template. We call it the Sibo Recovery Roadmap. It's a mouthful.
Yes.
And we've done a whole course based on this. So I think I wish I had this 5 years ago walking into my practitioner, and they would have been like, okay, got it. And then all the, the studies and stuff. At some point I did start doing that. I just started walking in the studies, and I had some great folks. It was like, okay, so where's your pharmacy?
Yeah, it is getting, I think in North America, it's getting much more common that at least the provider would have heard of it and won't just dismiss it out of hand. But I think, like you were saying, the feedback that we hear from patients is not all providers are there. And there's many other things in medicine that happens with, but new things, even though this is not a brand new idea, doctors will use the terminology. I don't believe that that's a problem, or I don't believe in that, like it's the Easter Bunny or something like that. Right. And it's one of the reasons that there are many reasons that happens. Sometimes it just means their curiosity hasn't been piqued enough, or not enough patients have come in and said, this is a thing, check into it. But the other side of it is, doctors get really, they know what works for them. They know what they've done in the past, and not all doctors are incredibly curious and wanting to add new, like saying, gee, maybe I could have this big chunk of my IBS patients who I just treat symptomatically get better. Wouldn't that be, crazy good? Not everyone thinks that way. And so that's one of the things I was going to say, because we've both been on the different sides of that equation. From the patient point of view, you got somebody out there who this is probably a piece of the pie of what's going on. What's the best way to interact with their healthcare provider if they're not getting very far? I mean, obviously the final solution is getting a different healthcare provider, but let's say there's a crack that the door opens a little. What's the way to get through there?
I would say, just to be calm, be educated yourself, be respectful, and be like, I really think I have this, or I'm curious, and I invite them to be on the journey with you. Literally, I lucked out and found a gastroenterologist who was curious and very supportive, but I did have to bring the studies and the dosage and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And now he's like, always gets SIBO patients and sort of thanks me for that, sort of. He's not totally sure because he gets really complicated cases. But I just, I came in and I just said, listen, here's some of your peers, Dr. Pimentel, Dr. Satish Rao, I'll drop in names and all that, and handed them copies of the studies with highlights just to make the appointment go faster and better. And I've been like, can I have a script for this? What do you think? Engage them, invite them. Don't just be like, steamroller over them. Be respectful of yourself and them. And I think that's a good start. And if you have a doctor or somebody who says, don't ever bring me a study, then that's a really good reason to leave. So
yeah. I think that those are extremely excellent points. You do, obviously you don't want to start out confrontational,
right.
Because that in any human interaction that sets people, not on the path to oneness. But I think that, I have had the experience many times of patients coming in and maybe having just like a one page of a front of a study or just a name of something and saying, have you ever heard of this? Or maybe brought in a book and said, and I would say, well, I've heard of it, but I don't know anything, about it really as far as treating people. And then realizing that, they thought, well, that's a piece of what's going on in my case. Maybe would you look into it? And I think people who especially are trying to help larger sections of their chronically ill patients, if you make it a pretty easy entry point, and you have a lot of, you have a lot of good studies listed and a lot of things of that nature. But a lot of times when they see, oh, gee, this is like a real gastroenterologist from a real university who's doing studies, and I just didn't realize that was going on. It's like, oh, maybe I should catch up on this,
Yeah.
There's always, and we see this with all forms of medicine, there's always times where it's just not going to work because they don't want to go there.
Yeah.
It's just, it's just that, and then you just have to move on.
Right.
Something nice, I think, for people to know is, it's great if you have a gastroenterologist who wants to work with you on this. A lot of people in more rural areas, the nearest gastro may not be near them. And this is something that any type of healthcare provider who is interested in learning how to do it can help you with. You don't have to go to a gastroenterologist.
Right.
You might have to for certain, testing to rule stuff out, but you can have this treated with, there are many nurse practitioners who do it, family practice type folks, internal medicine folks, just whomever. It's not limited. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not like a colonoscopy or an endoscopy where you really need a specialist.
Right.
If you have a complicated case, definitely try to find a SIBO specialist. And, I have a list of speakers at SIBOSOS.com. Dr. Allison Seebecker's SIBOinfo.com is an incredible resource. But you can literally go to Gemelli Labs and, get a requisition form, I think. You can go to I think I've done this. Go to Aerodiagnostic Labs and, walk in with a requisition form. And you might even now help other patients because now that doctor is going to start working with that lab and being able to have the test kits. You can do those tests at home. I mean, it has become much more user-friendly. And Medicare often pays for the breath tests. So, and out of pocket, I think the most you're going to spend at Aerodiagnostic Labs, I don't work for them, so please don't hold them to it, but it was like around $175 out of pocket for cash. And if you want to retest at the end of your treatment, so logistics at the end of that treatment, 2 weeks, a month, whatever you're doing, make sure you have a test at home so that you can do the prep diet and then the 12-hour fast and then do the test. Because otherwise you got to make a doctor's appointment and, it's a whole thing. So logistically, it's a really important point. Make sure you get a second test at home.
Yeah, you want to have your kit for before and after. And then also, unless something goes off the rails in the middle of your treatment, it's easier on the the healthcare provider too, because you've got your before and after, you know how it went. You can tell them, they can look and decide what to do next. And you've got all that laid out in the book.
I do.
Really, really well, which is great. The less vagueness in the world, the more likely your doctor is to do things. So how long ago? I don't even remember how long ago I met you, but how long ago did you encounter Allison Siebecker, Dr.
So
Siebecker?
2016-ish. She wasn't practicing at the time, and I would just go to her website and like stare at her schedule and like stalk her schedule where, she would take online appointments. And a lot of this was my intuition. Like I was doing a lot of listening to God in all forms. I would like just heard like, hey, go check Allison's, website today. And sure enough, she was seeing patients again. And so I booked like 6 appointments, like the initial one, and then one 2 weeks later, and then one a month later. And then like as far out as she could go, I was like planting myself in her schedule because I'd already spent so much money on trying to figure it out that and wasted a lot of money. I knew that I was going to actually spend money to go to a specialist, but ultimately was going to save me money and time because it wasn't, how's that working for you? The other way wasn't working.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. Dr. Siebecker has a lot of amazing resources, and you've mentioned her and her resources in there, and that flow chart that you showed us comes from some of her work. I've worked with her for a long time. I don't know how long I've known her, but probably since she was in school, actually. And I think that, it's people like Dr. Pimental and Allison and all of the others who have just really kept pushing this forward as far not just doing research, but helping to refine the clinical practice, because the research is great. And I remember like when Pimental first started to publish and we saw it and thought, those of us who are a little more open to trying new things, and thought, let's give this a go. And it was like, there was no guidance at all. Like we were just, theoretically this should do this. And the patients, some of them got better, some didn't, like you see. And that's how kind of we all learned about stuff. So I think for somebody, even though you probably, if you're a Sibo patient and you don't know it, you've had a frustrating health journey one way or the other, now is a really wonderful time to try and encounter the healthcare system as opposed to, years ago. The other thing I would mention, because one benefit of age is before Sibo was a known quantity or anyone wrote anything or anyone even had idea to study it, while we had thoughts that there were these, we called it, like dysbiotic activity of, wrong bug, wrong place, right? But that's something that's just sort of, we know it happens, but no one had figured out, put 2 and 2 together. I do remember, and I'm mostly saying this for people out who might be listening and saying, well, I wonder if that's in the ballpark. So we talked about like people diagnosed with, fibro and IBS and chronic fatigue and all those things. The other thing that I noticed in retrospect now that the pre-Sibo, so my practice goes pre-Sibo and post, the people who reacted very oddly or atypically to either herbal or drug things that should have done one thing when they took them orally, and they wound up getting extremely bad, pain or diarrhea for days that didn't stop, or other things that don't match that treatment. Most of those people that had the most, what I would call just the most wild atypical reactions to things that we didn't see coming, they all wound up being Sibo patients.
Wow.
Like that was, and that's only knowing people and looking at their cases long enough to see, oh, gee, 20 years ago, this bad thing happened when we gave you this treatment. And it was because you already had Sibo and, it interacted the wrong way. So if you have atypical reactions to taking things orally, sometimes that's another thing I've seen. I don't know if you've noticed that, but it seems to be true.
Yeah, I mean, people. So the Sibo Facebook group, Sibo SOS Facebook group has 18,000 people in it. So they are all talking about the weird stuff that is happening to them. Some people are like, "Oh, I did rifaximin for 2 weeks and I feel so great, you guys." And other people are like, "Oh, I took it and this happened or that happened," or, does anyone have like, ingrown toenails from SIBO? I mean, it's just everybody's got something going on.
Yeah.
We're all different. We all,
Yeah.
have stuff. And, Paul, when I first started this, my own personal journey and went out to Portland, Oregon, where like this cache of SIBO specialists exists.
Yeah.
Right. I would have told you that I definitely didn't have Lyme and that I had no mold exposure and I never had mono, so I don't have Epstein-Barr virus. And what ended up happening is, and Ehlers-Danlos, thank you. I'm not even talking about like a second year medical student who has it all, right? Who's like, "Oh, I got that. But it turns out like you really do have all those things, which explains a lot. So remember, SIBO is caused by something else. It causes other things. You can feel better. I do. Managing a chronic condition can make you feel 100% better than an unmanaged chronic condition. And that's been a big learning for me and a big message I have for everyone, because if you, of course, everyone wants to be cured of. Yeah, I love it. Of course, that's totally normal. But
yeah,
if you can at least manage a condition, you can feel 100% better. And that's, I think, some of the wisdom I have learned from this process. And I want to encourage people, because the cynicism that can come from long-term unresolved health issues and the financial burden and the depression and the isolation and the loneliness and all of those horrible things, you're not alone. There are solutions. Hang in there and work a plan. And maybe one day you do absolutely nothing, and then other days you're super enthusiastic. That's all fine. That's all fine.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. That's obviously, yes, everybody would like just something to cure the problem and have it be an old memory, like breaking your arm or something. And one thing I would say, just as a plug, maybe to, maybe not people who are in their middle or later ages who might be diagnosed, but now that people are aware, or as parents become aware, if you start seeing these symptoms in your children, they have a much higher chance of healing, et cetera, completely, the earlier you find out this is the problem.
Right.
Like you were saying, your food poisoning from when you were 5 years old, haunts you to this day. I mean, that's a problem. That's a thing. So the earlier you can help younger people, but let's say it's, okay, good for the young people. The psychology behind having something chronic is a whole other part of being more or less well. And you did a really good job of explaining it. And I do think that you brought up some other things, like people with chronic infections, say whether it's the Lyme family or Epstein-Barr or whatever. If you've been dealing with those things and you're still kind of hitting a wall in certain places and no one's looked at this end of the problem, that goes both ways, really. And so that was another thing that we did with folks once we started to become aware of this, was we would send a lot of our chronic infectious people that were just in this loop of, they get a little better and then they'd crash, and they get a little better and they crash. You keep having to look under rocks. Well, Sibo became one of the big rocks to kind of pick up and make sure wasn't going on. Because everything that weakens you makes everything else worse. And there is, it's not great fun to have something that's chronic that's probably not going to go away. But you do need to live your life, and you can either push it in a direction where you're more healthy more of the time and you feel better more of the time, or not. And it's really hard when you've been kicked around by the system, or you went down, roads that didn't, dead end roads, or whatever. And it's just, being encouraged about that there are more answers is sometimes that's enough to get people to kind of, pick it
Keep
up
going.
and do
Keep,
more.
keep going. I mean, I spent so much time and energy and money, and I love Ayurveda and I love acupuncture. I've been Rolfed and you name it.
Yeah.
But the thing that to your point, it, it's easy to normalize not feeling well, right? So that's another thing you have to be careful of. Like, it's like if you look at old photos, I've done this before where we used to gather for birthday parties, obviously, but we had a very strong pattern of gathering for birthday parties for this, like 8 of us. And I can look back at these group pictures and tell you, yeah, I didn't feel good that day. Yep, I didn't feel good that night either. Yep, I remember I had to unbutton my pants underneath the dining room table that night too. Oh, look, I'm really, I mean, like, I can, like, everyone's having a good time, but I can track how I wasn't feeling well year after year after year after year. It's not normal to not feel well, and you deserve to feel well.
Yeah.
And it's your birthright. And sometimes you have to put out a lot of effort for it, and it sucks, but there you go.
Yeah.
And then tell your friends about it and talk about it and educate other people about it, because maybe they're in that same situation or they know someone. Word of mouth is huge for these situations because it's not happening in your typical medical environment. So please spread the word.
Yes. Now, so in just a couple of minutes, because we're on the tail end of before we get the electronic hook. But so here's the book, Healing Sibo. All right, there. And you can get it anywhere where you get books. Now, we got a couple of minutes before I'm going to transition to your resources and where to get a hold of you and all of that business. But before we hit that, is there any other one or two things about the book in particular that, now there's not a lot of books for the public about Sibo anyway, but some real shining lights. I think the page 111 flowchart is a big shining light, because that simplifies about 10,000 pages of problems.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The diet part will tell you how you can start feeling better right away by switching up your diet, because the food is what's feeding the bacteria. And it doesn't cure it, remember, but it can make you feel better really quickly. And I have over 40 recipes that are actually really delish.
Yes.
And I have Dr. Seebecker's Sibo-specific food chart in the back. She was very gracious to let me use that. So you'll be able to really tell what to consume. And then I did make a 21-day plan, mainly because the publisher wanted me to. So I was like, for sure. And it's basically suggestions like, okay, if you're just figuring this out now, this is what I would do first. And then I would do this. And then I would do this. And if you did it in 21 days, you'd be well on your way to feeling so much better. So I give you a week by week guide. But what's cool about like that algorithm is that you can come in anywhere on the algorithm and work your plan. So that's one of my favorite parts. Yeah, that combination of the recipes and the algorithm.
Yeah, I think if you didn't mention it, I was going to. I know for everybody, one of the most frustrating things when you have diet manipulated disease of any type is, well, what in the world do I eat? Because it's not that people don't want to change things. It's just there's a billion ways you can eat or not eat, and you don't have time to reinvent the wheel. Right. The recipes are amazing. They're the kind of thing that every patient I've ever talked to about this would have loved to have had, because at least you got a place to start. And then, and you've got Dr. Seebecker's, chart that shows you, okay, more or less fermentable foods. Then you can kind of branch out and okay, this is what I'm going for with my diet. But you can literally start to feel better just by shifting your diet, and then there's many other things to do. So yeah, I think that's a real a gold mine among many other things. The other thing too is, it's not a difficult read, it's because some books, even written for the public, and I'm speaking from my own experience with editors, I've been told by editors, this chapter is great, but you're not writing for doctors. You need to rewrite this for anybody who wants to read it. So then I rewrite it. This reads really easily. It describes things the way they need to be described. Anybody can manage, being informed. And the other thing is, if you do give it to your doctor, they like simple things too, usually. Like your doctor, if they're interested, can pick up the ideas really quick out of the book. So now, of course, if the person has the book, on the back, there's a lot of contact information for you, et cetera. But so there's SIBOSOS, so SIBOSOS.com.
Yes.
And is that your main
that's
landing site?
That's my main website. Yeah. And we have all kinds of resources there and exclusive discounts on SIBO supplements, because I strong armed people into making them give them to me so the community could get them.
Good.
And yeah, really good discounts. So that's a great place. The Sibo SOS community on Facebook is a great place. I mean, that's really a hotbed.
And if on Facebook, if they just search Sibo SOS, it'll come to the community.
It will come to our page, and the page is okay, but you really want to get into that Sibo SOS Facebook group. So go to the page, check it out, like it, thank you. But then search groups in Facebook, Sibo SOS community. You'll find us there. Okay,
so Sibo SOS, search through groups. Very good.
Yep.
SIBOSOS.com will get to you, and I bet you probably have links there to everything as well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Very good. And of course, the book Healing Sibo, and I think if you just search that. That will get you there, because I don't think there's any other book with that title out there.
I hope not, because I'd be it's on Amazon, guys. And by the way, the actress that read the Audible book did an excellent job. You can get it on Kindle and all that jazz.
Right. So it's all the usual electronic ways of getting books, including Kindle, et cetera. That's great that you've got an audio book too. That's awesome. Well, we're winding right down. And so first, I just want to thank you for coming on. It's always, it's a lot of fun to talk. You and I have never had a bad conversation. They've often run longer than we wanted. And I think we may do this again in a few months. Never know. We might talk about some other things related to it. Usually I get feedback, and I would love to have you back if you're amenable.
Thank you. Of course, because we didn't talk about biofilms.
No, that'd be hours if we.
Yeah, that would be hours. You're the only interview I ever did where I cried.
Oh.
But it was because it wasn't sad. It was tears of joy that you've made so much progress in the world of science. It was just, I was sad that my mom, who died of cancer, didn't know you and have those resources. But what a beautiful thing you do for the world to help us all heal.
Thank you.
Get educated and think differently. So remain curious, everyone. Thank you.
Yes, remaining curious, very important. Thank you so much. I didn't know that was coming, but so SIBOSOS.com, you can find everything else from there, or Healing Sibo, anywhere you get books of any form. All right, well, this is the end of the program for today. It's Dr. Paul Anderson, and I will see you all on the radio next week, and you can check out the podcast anytime you want. See ya.